Hockey teams typically play 6 defensemen at a time. I hope this isn't news to anyone here, but if it is, welcome. These 6 players are then split into 3 pairings. The top pair typically features the star and his running mate. The middle pairing may be a shutdown guy and a solid puck mover. And the bottom pair, a young power play specialist and his tough-as-nails supervisor. These 3 pairings split up the minutes, usually somewhat evenly. The top pair gets 25-ish, the second pair around 20, and the third pair around 15. These are the 6 of the 20 dressed players that make their living on the blue line. But full NHL rosters have 23 spots, giving teams room to bring extra players along to practice, rotate in for a change of pace, or sub for injury between games without needing to call someone up from the farm team. Sometimes these extra players will go weeks or even months without seeing the ice, just biding their time, waiting for their chance, expected to be ready at a moment's notice when their time arises. Typically, one of those 3 slots is a defenseman. When a forward goes down, his substitute is likely buried deep in the lineup. The absence of the injured player is rarely felt through anything the newly dressed player does, but through simply the absence itself. Think of it this way, if a scoring forward is injured, often the worst case scenario for his substitute is that they don't score. The subjective value of that slot in the lineup, at worst, drops to 0. Now when a defenseman is injured, the potential outcome for his substitute is much worse. If a team loses its number 1 defenseman and a new D-man dresses in his place, he operates entirely under a microscope. Multiple, for that matter. His team, the opposition, either team's fans are watching the new guy like a hawk. As a defenseman, his gaffes are extremely visible, and his successes rarely celebrated. A few bad plays and he drops the subjective value of that lineup spot well into the negatives. Is this fair or even factual assessment? No, not really. There are plenty of forwards around the league that are sub-replacement level, yet to the fans and even to the decision makers on their team, those forwards can hide. The guys on the back end cannot. Thus is the life of the 7th defenseman. This is a graph that plots every 7th defenseman that went to a cup final between 1980 and 2024. 81 different players thrust into action, be it for injury, coach's decision, or even suspension. I've gone through and researched extensively to find the true 7th defenseman for each team. They aren't always the guy that played the 7th most games. The x-axis plots the games played by each player. Some sat out game 1, but took over a starting role and ran with it, like 2022 Zach Bogosian, a healthy scratch in game 1 of Tampa's three-peat attempt, who then dressed for every other game during the run. Something of note, if a defenseman was injured for an entire run, they are not considered as part of the normal top 6. For example, Chris Letang missed the entirety of the 2017 playoffs, making the 7th defenseman for the Penguins heading into the playoffs Chad Ruhwedel, as opposed to Ian Cole, who, while technically 7th on the depth chart, was expected to and did play every single playoff game. So I felt that charting him would have been against the spirit of the exercise. Here's Chad's dot, about as unimpressive as they come. The y-axis shows each player's plus-minus, a flawed stat especially for this small of a sample, but it wasn't like I could use XG to assess Jeff Bukaboom in 1988, so we go with the classic. Ruhwedel boasted a -3, most of which came in an ugly Game 5 of the Eastern Conference Final. Chad also went without a point in his 6 games, represented by the size of his dot. The larger the dot, the more points the player scored. Zooming back out again, what catches your eye? This one here, right? This monstrosity is actually a pileup of 4 different dots. The bottom of the pile is Kevin Dean with 2 points in 3 games. He came in for the 1995 Devils, got 2 assists on the power play in the ECF against the Flyers, and didn't see the playoffs again for 2 years. When he came in for 1 game, scored the game-winning goal, and then went back to being healthy scratched. But Dean isn't the interesting guy in this bunch. Neither are 2 of the 3-game no statistical impact guys, Shane Knighty for the 2011 Bruins or Brian Muir for the 2001 Avalanche. No, we're here for a real throwback. From the 1981 Canucks, 19-year-old Andy Schliebener. In the 6th to last game of the season, some Canucks headed into the stands in Quebec City. Mark Crawford, Doug Hallward, Kurt Fraser, and their coach Harry Neal charged into the Quebecois fans. Though Crawford led the assault, which was reportedly in defense of Tiger Williams, Tiger Williams famously a guy that needed a lot of defending, you can see Harry Neal ragdolling this bald guy here, which I believe to be Pierre Fournel, allegedly the guy who hit Williams. While Neal has him, you can see Hallward crawl further into the stands and just clobber Fournel. Earned, maybe don't write a check you aren't good for there, Pierre. The league, understandably, did not like the Canucks' escapade, and President John Ziegler suspended the primary duo 10 games for Neal and 7 for Hallward. Roger Nielsen, who was scheduled to take over the Canucks head coaching job the next season anyway, took over behind the bench, while Andy Schliebener slotted in on the blue line. Now, did Schliebener do much? No, not really. His stat line is somehow completely empty across all 3 of his games, the first 2 of which were as Hallward's replacement. But when Hallward returned, he resumed his talented and menacing way with multiple goals and multiple misconducts throughout the mediocre Canucks' unlikely playoff run. Was Andy Schliebener a massive impact player or even a young eventual star? Not really. It looks like he's a banker now. But the Canucks were undefeated in the 1982 playoffs with him in the lineup. He embodied the inoffensive, filling in 7th D-man. He's the middle of the road. Okay, I won't linger in the clump of blah, the Brad Bombardier region. You want to see the big boys. So we're headed up plus-minus mountain. Here's Philip Broberg. He was so good in the latter stages of Edmonton's run to the Cup in 2024, he played his way right out of town. Steve Smith is the higher games played but smaller points bubble. After he joined the Oilers lineup in 1987, they shellacked the Kings 13-3. It's fairly surprising Smith doesn't have a higher plus-minus given that. Though, even in that 13-3 game, he was only a +1. Smith didn't exactly light the world on fire during the run, but the Oilers lost just once with him dressed. But our lone +10, who also notched 6 points in his just 12 games, is Gourd Lane of the 1981 Islanders. Gourd Lane isn't really like many of the guys on this list because he's a 7th defenseman in name only. Gourd Lane was in the top 6 for the 1980 Stanley Cup champion Islanders and would be for the 1982 Stanley Cup champion Islanders. But the 1981 Islanders made a massive trade in March, sending young former first-round pick Steve Tambellini and longtime former All-Star goalie Chico Resch to the Colorado Rockies in exchange for Mike McEwen. Resch had lost his starting gig on Long Island to young Billy Smith, though the former was an extreme fan favorite. His exuberance made him a bit of a proto-Marc-Andre Fleury. The guy had a fan club, whose president was a mom that was put into a daze. Her husband came home early from work. That's the popularity we're talking about here. McEwen had been trying his best as a top pairing guy for the horrific Rockies, but he was a very good player and had a terrific playoff in '81, helping the Isles win the Cup. It was a great swap for both teams, at least in theory for the Rockies. But McEwen pushed Lane out of the lineup, which made sense since Lane was primarily just a bruiser on the back end. He only had 12 points in his 60 regular season games, making his half-point per game playoff even more strange. Were they just secondary assists? I asked myself. No, 4 primary assists and a goal. Now, are the primary assists more than I happen to give it to the best goal scorer in the world? Also, no. He did absolutely beam a shot past teenager Don Beaupre in the Cup final, though. That's something. Maybe he felt motivated filling in for the far more offensively gifted Stefan Persson. Lane isn't the only late-season demotion on our chart here. There are plenty of them. One was actually opposite him in the 1981 Cup final. Paul Schmier was old and hurt by the end of the 1981 regular season. He was a former WHA star who made the jump back to the NHL with Minnesota when the association folded. He won the WHA's Norris equivalent and played in the WHA's 1974 Summit Series against the Soviet Union. Already a 34-year-old veteran at the time, Schmier was named captain his first season in Minnesota, taking the mantle from the retired J.P. Parise, Zach's dad. But as I alluded to, Schmier was not in his prime with the North Stars. The offensive flair he possessed in the previous decade had vanished. That may seem cruel to say, but Paul himself said it. When asked about retirement, he told the Minneapolis Star, "It's just getting to be about that time," which is the most old guy thing he could have possibly said. Here's the thing about Paul Schmier. He was really chill. He wasn't the captain because he was a superstar anymore. He was the captain because his team, management, and coach really liked him. When a wrist injury sidelined the captain late in the season, everyone knew that a fully healthy, younger player would be better than a beat-up Paul Schmier. So he wasn't rushed back into the lineup. He watched on from afar as a semi-healthy scratch, captain from the press box. As his team took on Boston in the first round, Schmier quipped to them, "You guys better win, because if you don't, I'll be back in the lineup." The North Stars took his advice and swept the Bruins. But when defenseman Fred Barrett went down, in came Schmier, stating confidently, "These guys are playing so well, even I can't screw them up." He was right. The North Stars won with their captain in the lineup to eliminate the Sabres, though Schmier didn't play well enough for the North Stars not to dress just 5 defensemen instead to start their next series. Now, this was the era of 17 dressed skaters. That didn't change to 18 until 1982-83, so dressing 5 defensemen wasn't completely out of the ordinary, but still, it wasn't a glowing endorsement of Schmier's play. The captain didn't take this benching quite as well, and his tone switched from one of humor and self-deprecation to extreme annoyance. I'm disappointed, not just at not playing, but because no one has had the courtesy to explain the situation to me. I just think they should explain it to me. I don't think they're showing much class. Coach Lou Sonmer basically replied with, "I don't know what to tell you, man." It was all well and good for everyone not wearing the C until the Cup final, where the North Stars were brutalized by the Islanders in the first 3 games of the series. Minnesota needed a change. In came Paul, and he wrecked house. He threw his body around, he put shots on net, he showed up, and the North Stars won. "It's great to feel human again," Schmier declared. "Schmier's making me not look too smart as a coach," joked Sonmer. The cheeriness didn't last long. With Schmier in the lineup, the Stars got shelled in Game 5. In the aftermath, he said to the Minneapolis Tribune that in Game 4 he proved, quote, "that I could play, whether they think I can or not," and made it clear he was cutting town, an ugly divorce in the second to last season of the Stars' career. Surely, that's the only captain of the North Stars on this list, right? Right? Kurt Giles was old and hurt at the end of the 1991 season. That happens when you're a small defenseman that played like a guy a foot taller than himself. Giles was never a star, but he had a long, reliable career. He was a warrior, but his body was starting to break down. He would retire for a time after the 1991 playoffs, though he did have a short comeback attempt. It was getting to be about that time. He had missed some games to end the regular season with a knee injury, but he played in Game 2 of the first round against Chicago. His showing wasn't especially strong, and he found himself back on the bench, supplanted by Jim Johnson. But when Johnson went down, Giles came back into the lineup. Nothing really notable happened regarding the captain's play, so when Johnson was healthy, he was in, and Giles came out. Why is this run notable aside from it just being a coincidence that another North Stars captain is on this list? Because during that whole run, Giles didn't say a thing. Okay, he wasn't completely mute. He kept pointing to his lucky hat that happened to advertise a business he was invested in, but still, not a single complaint, not a single gripe. When his team lost in the final while he was a healthy scratch, not a word of they needed more experience in the lineup. And why is that? Because 10 years earlier, a 22-year-old Giles was in the top 6 on the Stanley Cup runner-up Minnesota North Stars. He never mentioned smear. He probably thought very highly of his former captain, who was, again, a generally likable and popular guy. But you can draw a line of conjecture that when Giles was a young player, hearing the griping from a leader behind him that he was better than, he made the either conscious or subconscious decision that he would never be the man griping to the media about playing time, then flaming his team on the way out. After his team fell to the Penguins, he said he wished he was playing and said it was agonizing not to be out there. But he knew his coach had to do what he had to do to win. He seemed open to being one of the inaugural Sharks, which didn't happen. He wasn't happy with riding the pine, but he never put the guys in front of him in the position he had been in 10 years prior. Now, I'm not saying that Giles was a saint or Schmier was evil or anything. I wasn't in those locker rooms. But these two proud veterans beautifully encapsulate the duality of the trials and tribulations of being a seventh defenseman. Suffer in silence or suffer aloud. Though that suffering is easier to take if you win. With that, we return to the quadrant of joy and success, and few teams had more joy and success than the early 2000s Red Wings. But the 2002 playoffs did not start with much glee for Detroit. They had fallen down 2-0 to the 8th-seeded Vancouver Canucks. The Canucks were not an especially deep team, and their 2-star forwards Marcus Naslund and Todd Bertuzzi had been menacing the Wings through 2 games. Coach Scotty Bowman called for a change. From Art Regner's article on DetroitRedWings.com, we fly overnight after the game to Vancouver, and the next day we had a late afternoon practice. All the coaches, all the managers, all the trainers were in one locker room, and we're debating what we're going to do, Dave Lewis said. After about 45 minutes, Scotty Bowman went out of the room. He was sort of non-committal anyway, listening to everybody. He comes back in about 5 minutes and said, "Yep, I got it. I talked to Nick, and Nick wants to play with Freddy Allison. So it's all set. No worries. Uwe Krupp is out, Freddy Allison's in, and we'll be good to go." In that same article, Lewis says he spoke with Lidstrom shortly after, who said he hadn't even spoken to Scotty that day, which I have no reason to believe is false. Now, the way this is framed is, oh, Scotty just made this up based off team chemistry, tee-hee. I mean, Nick Lidstrom is why Allison was on the team. Lidstrom played a role in Allison being at the 2002 Olympics, and I'm sure, verbally or otherwise, Lidstrom made it clear that he wanted to play with Freddy Allison. And he was right. With Allison allowing Detroit to split up Chris Chelios and Nick Lidstrom, the Wings mopped up the Canucks with 4 straight wins. Bertuzzi and Naslund combined for just 1 goal and 2 assists in those games. Come on, Ben, you're saying. That series was won by Dominik Hasek being Dominik Hasek and Dan Cloutier being Dan Cloutier. Sure, fine. But Freddy Allison was about to make an undeniable mark in Red Wings history. With his success against Vancouver, Allison had made himself invaluable. He was never removed from the lineup as Detroit cruised past St. Louis to meet their hated rival, the Colorado Avalanche, in the conference final. After splitting the first 2 games, the crucial Game 3 headed to overtime. After being a healthy scratch in Games 1 and 2 of the Red Wings' 2002 championship campaign, Freddy Allison never again saw the inside of the press box. There is a good chance that without him, the Red Wings don't win the Stanley Cup. Be it the close call against Vancouver or the grinding 7-game series against the Avs, the Wings needed Freddy. They needed their number 7. But I know we can be sickos sometimes. Sometimes we want to head into the sewers and see who lives down there. You all want to know who this guy was. The thing is, he very well may be the most talented guy on this entire chart. And there are some good players on here. Rob Ramage, the largest ball up in the top right, was a first overall pick. While he was never a superstar, he was a major factor in the Flames winning the Cup in 1989 and had a bunch of good seasons as a top-pairing defenseman. Rookie Torrey Krug is over to the west of Ramage, and he was a top-pairing level guy for about a decade. No shade to those guys, but they were both born in the right generation. Our cellar dweller over here was not. This is Greg Hogood, and he was not a forward. In his draft year, Hogood logged 119 points with the WHL's Kamloops Blazers, leading all of the league's defensemen. That earned him the honor of being picked in the 10th round of the 1986 NHL Draft by the Boston Bruins. Now, I don't claim to know the ins and outs of prospect evaluation from the mid-80s. It seems like a lot of the WHL guys were drafted low, including Hogood's 173-point scoring teammate Robbie Brown. But I do think the 10th round sounds exceptionally low for a defenseman who outscored Hall of Fame quality forwards in Theo Fleury and Mark Recchi. But Hogood was small, and the NHL was in its caveman era. The Bruins draftee simply continued to be utterly dynamic offensively throughout 2 more years in the WHL, scoring 123 and then 133 points, with strong performances at the World Juniors in both seasons. Now, it'd be dishonest to not include the fact that Hogood played some forward in juniors, but at his core, he was a defenseman. He joined the Bruins on a full-time basis in the fall of 1988 and was instantly electric. Through 31 games, Hogood had a stat line of 8, 15, and 23. He wasn't a shrinking violet either. Many, almost all, of his highlights on YouTube are him fighting, as one did in the 1980s. But in his 32nd game of the season, Bruins coach Terry O'Reilly tried the young guy at forward. Everyone chuckled. Hogood played well enough in those couple shifts, still quarterbacking the power play. I will admit that by all accounts, Hogood was horrific defensively. Now, was he? Can't really be sure. Show me the XG, you cowards. The Boston Globe was tracking shot locations back then. Why wouldn't the league start for another 20 years? But let's try our best to take plus-minus at face value. Try our best. Hogood, through his first season that was apparently so comically bad defensively he should have changed his name to Not Good or Dawgood, according to the Boston Globe. Probably could have picked one of those zingers there, fellas. Was a -4. Guys, what's the big deal? This is a defenseman that scored 16 goals and had 40 points in 56 games as a rookie. Gang, give the defense some time. You have someone special here. But soon came Greg's biggest obstacle, Mike Milbury. As the Bruins' new coach, Milbury seemed much more interested than his predecessor in playing the 21-year-old sophomore as a forward. After Hogood started slowly in the fall of 1989, Milbury retracted Greg's extremely short leash. The head coach made the executive decision to try Hogood not just at forward, but as the Bruins' fourth-line center. What, is Lyndon Byers gonna show him a thing or two? Said Hogood to the Boston Globe. Yeah, me too, man. Greg admitted that he hadn't been good so far that season and would rather be playing forward than not at all, but he didn't exactly exude excitement. Milbury just kept moving Hogood around. offense, defense, center, wing, sometimes mid-game. I will admit that Milbury, in his own strange way, did give his young rover a chance to succeed. He often slotted Hogood in as the left wing on the top line, with stars Craig Janney and Cam Neely. Greg, a great skater, just tried to use his speed and tenacity on the forecheck to open up space for his line mates. The few chances he got to play defense, he played alongside Ray Bourque. Milbury didn't think Hogood sucked by any means. Throughout the rest of the season and into the playoffs, Hogood played wherever, mostly forward. His place in the lineup was still sporadic in the playoffs. He played hard, but the switching seemed to catch up with him. When he wasn't filling in for an injured Bourque on the blue line, he was still mostly playing wing with Neely and Janney, which did work like a charm through 3 rounds when it was sparingly deployed, though it didn't show up on the score sheet much for Hogood, but that line got slaughtered by the Oilers in the Cup final. I mean, who could have guessed that the successful puck-moving defenseman that was forced to switch positions at 21 would struggle going up against Mark Messier with something to prove? So that's how Greg Hogood, maybe the most talented player on this entire chart, ended up here, in the sewer, because he wasn't a forward. The story really doesn't end there. It actually has a worse ending. In the summer following the Bruins Cup final loss, Italy's professional hockey league was hurling all sorts of money at NHL players. They even lured over near-prime Jari Kurri. While the Bruins offered Hogood around $100,000 to re-sign, the Italian club Asiago offered the upstart $250,000 tax-free, a car, a penthouse, and more amenities than Boston could possibly compete with. Hogood went over, didn't like it, and came home to the Bruins. Harry Senden, the Bruins GM, who wasn't not a dick, clearly took Hogood's European vacation personally. When Hogood left, Senden said it would ruin his development. When Hogood came back, Senden said plainly that he would trade him. After 6 games with the Bruins affiliate, the Maine Mariners, Hogood was shipped off to Edmonton for Vladimir Ruzicka. While he lit it up with the Cape Breton Oilers of the AHL, Hogood played just 6 games in the NHL in 1991, then just 20 games in the NHL the next season. Though he did score 13 points in those 20 games, by the way. The rest of his NHL career, he just kicked around from team to team, up and down, never able to carve out a home. Did Milbury playing him at forward jack with Greg's development? Probably. Did it play a role in his failed trip to Europe, which further hurt his development? Maybe. Did it derail a promising defenseman's career before it started? You could make that argument. One thing I think definitively, though, if Greg Hogood played in today's NHL, he'd be a star. While Greg suffered more than some, suffering is the one thing that ties all of these guys together. Every single guy on this chart, 81 professional athletes who spent most of their lives as the best player, the star on their youth teams, had to be told, these 6 guys are better than you. In life, sometimes there are people that are better than us at things we're passionate about. How do we handle it? Do we adapt, change ourselves, accept it, and find peace with ourselves? Or fight it, deny ourselves? There isn't a right answer. I'm not a philosopher or psychologist. I'm not here to tell you what to do, which path to choose. But whichever you go down, stay focused, keep pushing, be prepared, because at any moment, you could be the next one in.